In the shadowed corridors of Renaissance Florence, where political intrigue danced with philosophical revolution, Niccolò Machiavelli understood a truth that would echo through centuries. The greatest conquest is not of territories or enemies, but of oneself. His wisdom cut through the comfortable illusions of modern existence with surgical precision. To change so completely that the world no longer recognizes you is not merely transformation. It is rebirth through the deliberate destruction of everything weak within. The principle stands stark and uncompromising. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. This is not the gentle self-improvement of contemporary psychology, nor the gradual evolution celebrated in popular culture. This is radical metamorphosis, a complete reconstruction of being that renders one unrecognizable to former associates, immune to old vulnerabilities, and possessed of power that flows from authentic strength rather than borrowed authority. Consider the moment when transformation becomes inevitable. It arrives not with fanfare, but with the quiet recognition that the person you have been is insufficient for the life you must live. The realization strikes like lightning in a clear sky. Every compromise made in the name of comfort, every truth swallowed to preserve peace, every dream deferred to maintain acceptability. These constitute the architecture of a prison so familiar it feels like home. The weak self clings to this prison, finding identity in its limitations, comfort in its predictable sufferings. But the awakened consciousness recognizes these chains for what they are: voluntary servitude to mediocrity. Machiavelli's genius lay not in his often misunderstood advocacy for political cunning, but in his unflinching examination of power's true nature. Power, he observed, belongs not to those who inherit it or demand it, but to those who transform themselves so completely that they become its natural vessel. The weak seek power to compensate for their inadequacies. The transformed embody it as an extension of their reconstructed being. This distinction separates temporary influence from lasting authority, external manipulation from internal mastery. The journey begins with a brutal inventory of the current self. Every weakness must be catalogued with the dispassionate precision of a surgeon preparing for a difficult operation. Fear masquerading as prudence, laziness disguised as patience, cowardice dressed as diplomacy. Each must be identified and marked for elimination. This process requires the courage to see oneself without the flattering filters of self-justification. Most people live their entire lives avoiding this confrontation, preferring the familiar discomfort of known limitations to the uncertain territory of transformation. But for those who choose the path of complete change, the inventory becomes a map to freedom. Each identified weakness represents not a permanent character flaw, but a target for reconstruction. The fearful become fearless not through the absence of fear, but through its alchemical transformation into prudent courage. The procrastinator evolves into the decisive not by eliminating all hesitation, but by channeling uncertainty into thorough preparation followed by bold action. The people-pleaser metamorphoses into the authentically caring by replacing desperate need for approval with genuine concern for others' welfare. This transformation requires the development of what Machiavelli termed virtue, a concept far richer than its English translation as virtue would suggest. Virtue encompasses excellence of character, practical wisdom, strategic thinking, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining core principles. It is the quality that enables leaders to navigate complexity without losing their moral compass, to make difficult decisions without sacrificing their humanity, to exercise power without being corrupted by it. The cultivation of virtue begins with the establishment of non-negotiable principles. These are not rigid rules, but flexible guidelines that bend without breaking, adapt without compromising essential truth. A person of virtue might employ deception to protect the innocent, but never to exploit the vulnerable. They might show mercy to the repentant enemy while remaining prepared for betrayal. They understand that consistency in action stems not from uniform behavior, but from uniform commitment to worthy ends achieved through contextually appropriate means. As transformation deepens, the individual discovers that change so radical it renders them unrecognizable serves multiple purposes. First, it liberates them from the expectations and limitations others have imposed based on past behavior. People who knew you as indecisive cannot manipulate your newfound decisiveness because they do not recognize it as genuine. Those who relied on your former people-pleasing tendencies find themselves dealing with someone who considers their opinion but is not controlled by their approval. The old tools of influence become obsolete when the old person ceases to exist. Second, complete transformation creates a psychological advantage that borders on the mystical. When you have genuinely changed at such a fundamental level that your former associates struggle to predict your responses, you operate from a position of perpetual surprise. This is not the calculated unpredictability of the manipulator, but the authentic evolution of someone who has rebuilt themselves from the foundation up. Your responses come from a new center of being that others cannot map because it did not exist in their previous experience of you. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the destruction of the weak self eliminates the internal vulnerabilities that others might exploit. The person who has overcome their desperate need for approval cannot be controlled through praise or criticism. The individual who has conquered their fear of failure cannot be paralyzed by threats of consequences. The one who has transcended their attachment to specific outcomes cannot be defeated by temporary setbacks. They become like water in Bruce Lee's famous analogy, shapeless, formless, adaptable, yet possessed of the power to carve through stone given sufficient time and focused application. The process of destroying weakness requires both the violence of a revolutionary and the patience of a gardener. Some aspects of the old self must be cut away with swift decisiveness, the habits that no longer serve, the relationships that drain without replenishing, the beliefs that limit without protecting. Other changes require careful cultivation over time, the development of new skills, the formation of beneficial habits, the gradual rewiring of thought patterns that have operated automatically for years or decades. Consider the transformation of relationship patterns. The weak self often operates from scarcity, believing that love, respect, and opportunity are limited resources that must be hoarded or desperately pursued. This creates relationships based on fear, manipulation, and mutual exploitation disguised as care. The transformed individual recognizes abundance in all things worthwhile and operates from a position of generous strength. They give respect freely while demanding it for themselves. They offer love without attachment to specific returns. They create opportunities rather than competing for scarce positions. This shift in relational foundation changes everything. Former friends may no longer recognize the person they thought they knew. Family members might struggle to understand someone who no longer plays familiar dysfunctional roles. Colleagues discover they are dealing with someone who cannot be controlled through the old methods. Some relationships deepen through this transformation, elevated by the increased authenticity and strength. Others dissolve, revealed as connections based on mutual weakness rather than genuine affinity. The dissolution of weak relationships, while sometimes painful, serves the larger purpose of creating space for connections based on strength, authenticity, and mutual growth. The transformed individual attracts different people, those drawn to genuine strength rather than those seeking to exploit weakness. These new relationships operate on entirely different principles. Mutual respect replaces emotional manipulation. Honest communication replaces passive aggression. Collaborative growth replaces competitive diminishment. In the professional realm, the complete transformation creates what appears to be a new person entering familiar environments. The employee who once accepted unreasonable demands discovers the power to negotiate from genuine alternatives. The leader who previously managed through fear learns to inspire through vision and example. The entrepreneur who built their business on desperation rebuilds it on confident value creation. Each professional relationship must be renegotiated based on the new reality of who they have become. The financial implications of complete transformation often prove dramatic. Weak people make financial decisions based on fear, scarcity thinking, and the need to maintain appearances. They accept inadequate compensation because they doubt their worth. They make investment decisions based on what others might think, rather than sound analysis. They spend money to fill emotional voids, or project images that mask their insecurities. The transformed individual approaches money as a tool for creating value and achieving worthy goals, rather than as a measurement of personal worth or a solution to emotional problems. This shift in financial consciousness often leads to rapid improvement in financial circumstances, not through magical thinking, but through the natural consequences of clear thinking, confident action, and value-based decision-making. The person who knows their worth can negotiate compensation that reflects it. The individual who understands investment principles can implement them without emotional interference. The one who spends based on values rather than insecurities finds their resources stretched much further toward meaningful goals. The physical transformation often accompanies and reinforces the psychological metamorphosis. The weak self frequently neglects the body or treats it as an enemy to be controlled through force. Poor eating habits, inadequate exercise, Insufficient sleep and excessive stress create a physical foundation that supports weakness and undermines strength. The transformed individual recognizes the body as the vehicle through which all other achievements must flow, and treats it accordingly. This is not vanity disguised as health consciousness, but practical wisdom applied to physical reality. A strong, healthy, energetic body supports clear thinking, emotional stability, and sustained action. The discipline required to maintain physical excellence develops the same mental muscles needed for other forms of self-mastery. The confidence that comes from feeling physically powerful translates into mental and emotional resilience. The changes in physical presence often prove as dramatic as any other aspect of transformation. Posture straightens as internal backbone develops. Energy increases as proper nutrition and exercise replace neglect and abuse. Presence becomes more commanding as internal authority grows. Others notice these changes before the transformed individual might recognize their full extent, responding to subtle shifts in how space is occupied, how attention is commanded, how authority is exercised. Mental transformation requires perhaps the most subtle, yet profound work. The weak mind operates through habitual patterns of thought that support limitation and fear. These might include catastrophic thinking that imagines disaster in every challenge, victim mentality that assigns responsibility for outcomes to external circumstances, or perfectionism that prevents action through fear of imperfection. Each of these mental patterns must be identified, understood, and systematically replaced with thoughts that support strength and effectiveness. This mental reconstruction involves both the elimination of harmful thought patterns and the installation of beneficial ones. Meditation, study, reflection, and conscious practice gradually rewire the neural pathways that determine automatic responses to various situations. The person who previously responded to criticism with defensive anger learns to extract useful information while discarding irrelevant emotional content. The individual who once procrastinated when facing difficult decisions develops the ability to gather necessary information quickly and choose decisively. The development of mental clarity eliminates one of the primary sources of external control. Confused thinking makes one vulnerable to manipulation by those who appear to offer certainty. Emotional reactivity provides others with buttons to push when they want to control behavior. Cognitive distortions create internal conflicts that external forces can exploit. Clear, calm, rational thinking rooted in accurate perception of reality becomes an impenetrable defense against these forms of influence. Emotional transformation proves equally essential and challenging. The weak emotional system operates through patterns learned in childhood and reinforced through years of repetition. These might include the need for external validation to feel worthy, anger as a response to any form of resistance, or anxiety as a constant companion to decision-making. Each emotional pattern either supports strength and effectiveness or undermines them. The transformation of emotional patterns requires both understanding their origins and practicing new responses until they become automatic. This is not emotional suppression, which only drives feelings underground where they continue to influence behavior unconsciously. Instead, it involves emotional alchemy, the conscious transformation of energy from forms that weaken into forms that strengthen. Fear transforms into prudent caution and appropriate preparation. Anger becomes fuel for constructive action rather than destructive reaction. Sadness deepens into compassion for oneself and others who struggle. Joy expands from fleeting pleasure to sustainable satisfaction with meaningful accomplishment. Each emotion becomes a source of information and energy rather than a master that controls behavior. The spiritual dimension of complete transformation addresses the deepest questions of identity, meaning, and connection to something larger than individual existence. The weak self often operates from an impoverished spiritual foundation, either dogmatic adherence to inherited beliefs without personal understanding, or materialistic rejection of any spiritual dimension whatsoever. Both positions limit the full development of human potential. The transformed individual develops a spiritual foundation that supports rather than contradicts rational thinking and effective action. This might involve reconnection with traditional religious wisdom understood through mature perspective, or development of personal spiritual practices that cultivate inner peace and broader perspective, or philosophical frameworks that provide meaning and direction without requiring belief in unprovable propositions. This spiritual development provides what Viktor Frankl called will to meaning, a source of motivation that transcends personal pleasure or pain and connects individual action to larger purposes. The person with strong spiritual foundation can endure temporary suffering for long-term goals, find meaning in difficult circumstances, and maintain hope through challenging periods. These qualities prove essential for anyone undertaking the difficult work of complete self-transformation. The social implications of radical transformation extend far beyond individual benefit. The person who has destroyed their weak self and rebuilt from strength becomes a catalyst for positive change in every environment they enter. Their presence gives others permission to consider their own transformation. Their example demonstrates that radical change is possible. Their energy elevates conversations, relationships, and group dynamics. However, this positive influence often encounters resistance from those invested in maintaining existing patterns. Family systems built around one person playing a weak role may actively sabotage transformation efforts. Professional environments that rely on predictable mediocrity may resist the disruption that excellence creates. Social groups organized around shared complaints may reject members who solve their problems and move toward strength. This resistance serves as a test of transformation's authenticity. The person whose change remains superficial will likely revert to old patterns when faced with sufficient pressure. The individual whose transformation runs deep will navigate resistance with a combination of compassion and firmness, understanding others' discomfort while refusing to sacrifice their growth to maintain others' comfort. The resistance also serves as a sorting mechanism, revealing which relationships and environments can adapt to support the transformed individual and which cannot. This sorting process, while sometimes painful, ultimately creates space for connections and opportunities more aligned with the new reality of who the person has become. Leadership emerges naturally from authentic transformation. The person who has conquered themselves possesses the moral authority to guide others facing similar challenges. Their leadership operates not through position or title, but through the compelling example of someone who has walked the path from weakness to strength. This form of leadership cannot be faked or borrowed. It flows directly from lived experience and genuine understanding. Such leaders do not demand followers, but attract them through the magnetism of authentic strength. They do not rule through fear, but inspire through vision. They do not manipulate, but influence through the power of their example. Their leadership style adapts to situations while remaining rooted in consistent principles derived from their transformation journey. The economic value of complete transformation extends beyond personal financial improvement to broader value creation. The transformed individual operates from abundance rather than scarcity, focusing on value creation rather than resource extraction. They build businesses that solve real problems rather than exploit human weaknesses. They create jobs that develop people rather than consume them. They contribute to economic systems that support human flourishing rather than merely generate profit. This approach to economic activity often proves more profitable in the long term than strategies based on exploitation or manipulation. Customers develop loyalty to businesses that genuinely serve their interests. Employees perform at higher levels when their work contributes to meaningful goals. Partners prefer relationships based on mutual benefit rather than zero-sum competition. The transformed individual attracts economic opportunities that align with their values while providing sustainable returns. The ripple effects of individual transformation compound over time and across social networks. Children observe parents who embody strength and learn different models of adulthood. Colleagues experience professional relationships based on mutual respect and collaborative achievement. Friends encounter someone who has transcended common limitations and consider their own potential for growth. Communities benefit from members who contribute rather than consume, who solve problems rather than complain about them, who create value rather than demand entitlements. These ripple effects can eventually influence entire cultures as growing numbers of individuals complete their own transformations and begin operating from strength rather than weakness. The social problems that seem intractable when approached through traditional methods become solvable when addressed by people who have conquered their own limitations and developed genuine capability. The maintenance of transformation requires ongoing vigilance and continuous growth. The old patterns of weakness do not disappear permanently upon first change. They remain as potential energy that can be reactivated under sufficient stress or complacency. The transformed individual must maintain practices that reinforce their new identity, while remaining alert to signs of regression toward old patterns. This maintenance involves regular honest self-assessment, continued learning and skill development, cultivation of relationships that support growth rather than enable weakness, and engagement in activities that challenge and stretch capabilities. It requires the humility to recognize that transformation is a process rather than a destination, combined with the confidence to continue growing rather than defending achieved positions. The joy of complete transformation lies not merely in what is gained, but in what is no longer lost. Energy once dissipated in internal conflict becomes available for creative action. Time previously spent managing the consequences of weakness becomes available for purposeful activity. Resources once consumed by problems created through limitation become available for opportunities created through strength. The peace that emerges from this transformation differs qualitatively from the temporary calm of conflict avoidance. It represents the deep satisfaction of alignment between values and actions, between potential and reality, between internal truth and external expression. This peace remains stable through external turbulence because it derives from internal foundation rather than external circumstances. The power that flows from complete transformation cannot be taken away because it does not depend on external sources. Position can be removed, wealth can be lost, relationships can end, but the strength developed through conscious reconstruction of self remains available regardless of circumstances. This power enables not dominance over others, but mastery of oneself, which proves the only foundation for sustainable influence and lasting achievement. As we consider Machiavelli's profound insight that the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, we recognize this is not merely philosophy, but practical wisdom for navigating the complexities of modern existence. The weak person lives in constant fear of external forces that might overwhelm their inadequate defenses. The transformed individual operates from internal strength that grows through challenge rather than diminishes through use. The choice between weakness and strength, between gradual decay and deliberate transformation, between comfortable limitation and uncomfortable growth, remains always available. Most people postpone this choice indefinitely, waiting for ideal circumstances that never arrive, hoping for external solutions to internal problems, dreaming of change while avoiding its requirements. The few who choose transformation discover that the ideal circumstances are those they create through their own development, that the only lasting solutions are those they implement through their own efforts, that change becomes reality only through sustained commitment to growth despite temporary discomfort. The world indeed no longer knows the person who has changed completely because that person has transcended the limitations that made them predictable, the weaknesses that made them controllable, the fears that made them manageable. They have become truly free, not through the absence of constraints but through the development of strength sufficient to choose their own constraints based on values rather than fears, on vision rather than limitation, on love rather than need. This freedom creates responsibility, not the burden of obligation to others' expectations, but the privilege of conscious choice about how to use one's capabilities. The transformed individual chooses their battles based on importance rather than emotion, their relationships based on mutual growth rather than mutual need, their goals based on authentic desire rather than external pressure. They become truly self-determined while paradoxically becoming more genuinely connected to others and more effectively contributive to collective well-being. The legacy of complete transformation extends beyond individual lifetime. The children of transformed parents learn different models of adulthood. The students of transformed teachers received education that develops character along with knowledge. The employees of transformed leaders experience work that develops their potential rather than merely extracts their labor. The clients of transformed professionals receive service that genuinely addresses their needs rather than simply generates revenue. Each person who completes the journey from weakness to strength adds to the cumulative evidence that radical positive change is possible, that human potential extends far beyond cultural norms, that individual transformation can serve collective evolution. Their existence proves that the limitations most people accept as permanent are actually choices that can be unmade through sufficient commitment and appropriate effort. The path from weakness to strength, from familiar limitation to unfamiliar capability, from defensive reaction to creative response, remains open to anyone willing to pay its price. That price includes the courage to face uncomfortable truths about current limitations, the discipline to maintain beneficial practices despite temporary inconvenience, the patience to allow natural growth processes to unfold according to their own timing, and the wisdom to integrate change in ways that enhance rather than destroy what is genuinely valuable in existing life. The reward for paying this price extends beyond individual benefit to encompass the joy of authentic self-expression, the peace of internal alignment, the power of conscious choice, the satisfaction of meaningful contribution, and the security of strength that cannot be taken away. These rewards compound over time, as transformation deepens and expands, creating lives of increasing richness, relationships of growing authenticity, and contributions of expanding value. Machiavelli's wisdom echoes across centuries because it addresses permanent aspects of human nature and social reality. The choice between strength and weakness, between conscious growth and unconscious limitation, between authentic power and borrowed authority, remains as relevant today as it was in Renaissance Florence. The specific challenges may evolve, but the fundamental principles of transformation remain constant. Honest self-assessment, committed practice, patient persistence, and courageous action in alignment with worthy goals. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others because he has eliminated the internal vulnerabilities that external forces exploit. He has become anti-fragile in Nassim Taled's terminology, growing stronger through stress rather than being weakened by it. He has developed what philosophers call ataraxia, unshakable peace, that comes from internal rather than external sources. He has achieved what psychologists term self-actualization, the fulfillment of potential through conscious development, rather than unconscious drift. Most importantly, he has discovered that the greatest victory is not over external enemies, but over the internal limitations that make external enemies dangerous. The fortress that cannot be breached from outside because it has no internal weaknesses for enemies to exploit. The strength that grows through challenge because it is rooted in principle rather than circumstance. The peace that persists through turbulence because it flows from aligned action rather than controlled environment. This is the complete metamorphosis that Machiavelli's wisdom makes possible. Transformation so radical that the world no longer recognizes you. Strength so authentic that others cannot destroy it. Power so genuine that it serves rather than corrupts. Freedom so complete that it enables rather than constrains. Growth so deep that it continues expanding throughout life. The choice to undertake this transformation remains always available, waiting only for someone with sufficient courage to begin the journey from who they have been to who they might become. In the end, we discover that Machiavelli's greatest insight was not about political power, but about personal transformation. The recognition that true invincibility comes not from external defenses, but from internal development. Not from controlling circumstances, but from developing strength sufficient to handle any circumstances. Not from avoiding challenges, but from growing through them until challenge becomes opportunity and weakness becomes strength.